sPlatform. Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. I am privileged to have with me this evening Professor Osmund Bopearachchi, noted archaeologist who is back visiting Sri Lanka for a few weeks. Welcome, Professor, and Professor, to introduce you, and it is very difficult to introduce Professor Bopearachchi because he is so distinguished. So let me try to sum up here. You are the Emeritus Director of Research of the French National Center for Scientific Research in Paris.
Yes.
And if that weren't enough, you are also a corresponding member of the French Academy, and the only Asian, and of course the first Sri Lankan to be a member of the French Academy. And you are also currently at the University of California at Berkeley. You are a professor of Central Asian History and Archaeology. Wonderful. I must say, it's a privilege to have you on this program.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks.
Right. Now, yeah. Professor, before we get into your storied history, which we could talk for hours, actually, it's so fascinating, but the reason you are in Sri Lanka at this present time is for the 90th birth anniversary discussions on the life and work of artist Jayantha, who was a noted international artist, a Sri Lankan, of course, back in the 60s and 70s. Would you like to say a little bit about Mr. Jayantha and his wonderful artistic talent?
I first met Jayantha in person in Paris 1 year before he passed away. I met him twice with his wife and their daughter.
He lived in Paris for some time.
He lived in Paris, yes. And then I got interested in his work, but unfortunately I was doing my postdoctoral program in Harvard. When I came back, he has already passed away. Jayant is an extraordinary painter, multi-talented. He died at the age of 52, 53. And within 30 years of active career, he started working in Sri Lanka, went to Soviet Union, and also did an exhibition in Turkey, and then he settled down in France. So when you look at his work, you get the Soviet inspiration, and then while he was in France, he was much inspired by Picasso, especially the blue period, and also by other painters. When I say that, I have to be very careful. He was inspired, but not copied. He translated these different artistic tradition of that period. So I'm talking about 1970s and 80s, and converted them into he translated them into his own style. So he created a style.
He had a unique style, didn't he?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, I call it universal because anybody can understand what he really wanted to convey. At the same time, the way that he depicted is not, stereotype style. It develops with the time, and also the contacts he had with different countries.
Now, I understand he had about 40 solo exhibitions of his art.
Yes.
In 30 different countries. Yeah. That is phenomenal.
It's really phenomenal for a Sri Lankan. Coming from here, and then knowing that he's a talented artist, like in Soviet Union and also in France, he was offered, scholarships and situations there. And maybe a very humble, very modest artist, and also who had exercised a total freedom. He didn't undergo any sort of a pressure, and I wish to talk about these things in detail later. Say he can take, for example, ideas from the Greek mythology, convert that into his own, And also, I mean, he did many things. I mean, we need hours and hours to talk about it, but I'm very much interested in how much the religious paintings or ideas inspired him, especially Buddhism, Hinduism, and the Greek mythology. He reinterpreted them, he translated them into his own style. That is the uniqueness of Jayantha.
So the celebration of his 90th birthday will involve a discussion at the Alliance Française at the auditorium there on the 30th of January.
Yeah.
I believe it's at 6 p.m.
6:30 p.m.
6:30 p.m.
Yes.
And of course there will be a display of select works of Jayantha Premachandra as well.
Yeah.
And you will be leading the discussion along with anyone else?
Yeah, from the former dean of the Faculty of the Fine Arts with Jagat.
Jagat Ravindra.
Yeah. And then, I mean, both of us will be just presenting few of the works, each about 20 minutes, and then the floor is open for the discussion. So we won't be able to cover everything. I thought of covering the religious side of his paintings, how he sees things, and then we will have a discussion. And there will be some paintings of Jayantha which will be exhibited there.
Wonderful. And do you believe that Jayantha Premachandra's work would be an inspiration for Sri Lankan artists, young Sri Lankan artists of today?
Yes, I think so, because we don't need to copy what existed already. What we need is to create your own style with freedom. What I see in his paintings, if you take, for example, the Shiva Nataraja, right, which is inspired by Chola bronzes, but he gives his own interpretation. So what we need is not repetitions. The artist should have, when the artist has the pencil or the brush in his hand, he should just go with it, with the ideas, without any taboos, without any restrictions. Jayantha didn't have any geographical, religious, cultural taboos. He was above all of them. So the younger generation can follow him in that perspective.
Excellent, excellent. And we look forward to that particular discussion, Professor. And now let's talk a little bit about you, because you have had a remarkable career over several decades, and I just mentioned 3 key posts that you have held, but let's track what you have been doing and where, because you seem to have been on so many continents as an archaeologist and studied so many different aspects of human civilization. And much of it is, of course, centered on Sri Lanka as well. And in I believe you did a lot of work in Central Asia.
Yeah.
Would you like to tell us about this?
I mean, I am a Sri Lankan, born here, and I graduated from the Kalini University. Did Western classical culture, that's a Greek and Roman civilization with a Greek and Latin background. So I was more oriented towards the Western world, and I came from west to east. It's funny for a Sri Lankan to say coming from west to east, but anyhow, that's what happened. So when I went to France, I mean, those days there were no scholarships. Since I knew French, I wanted to go to France. I was fascinated by French literature and the French philosophers. I mean, this was the time of Foucault and Jean-Paul Sartre and others. So I worked as a tourist guide and earned enough money to buy a return ticket.
So you worked as a tourist guide in Sri Lanka, and you earned enough money to buy a return ticket to Paris.
And then I had in my pocket about $120 or $30. That means French francs. But I had friends, because since I worked with the French tourist groups, so I worked in a restaurant for about 3 months
in Paris.
And then, curious incident, very fortunate incident, my future teacher, my Guruji, and also my spiritual father, who was working in Afghanistan as the director of the French archaeological delegation in Afghanistan, came back to France after the Soviet invasion.
Right. That would be around 1979?
79, yes. But he started his classes in 1980. So I went to his first class and introduced myself. And he was amazed to see a Sri Lankan speaking French. Normally, I should have spoken English. And then, so he asked me to come to this famous Cafe Mayu, and we had a coffee, and that was the beginning. And within 3 months, he arranged a scholarship for me for nearly 8 years, which I could do a BA Special, MA, MPhil, and the PhD under his guidance. And then after that, for the postdoc, I went to Harvard. That's the time that Jayantha passed away. And when I came back, I was recruited in the French National Center for Scientific Research. That is the beginning. And then
your move from west, which is Paris, to the east.
So what happened was, coming from a classical background, knowing Greek and Sanskrit, professor...
Greek and Sanskrit. By the way, I believe you speak about 8 or 9 languages.
At least I try to learn. At least I try to learn about 10 languages, including Pali and Sanskrit. So there was a collection of important coins in the French National Library, which is called Bibliothèque Nationale, of the Greek kings who were successors of Alexander the Great. So we are talking about the 4th, 3rd and 2nd century BCE. And they issued coins. On their coins, on the obverse, you have the Greek legend. And on the reverse, you have a legend in the Indian language, what we call Gandhari. It's not exactly Sanskrit, but written in Kharoshthi and Brahmi. So I was interested and started doing the catalogue on those coins. And thanks to my teacher, I could travel the whole world looking at the other collections in Europe, United States, India, and other places. Then
so you became an expert on coins, which is called a numismatist. A particularly difficult word to pronounce.
It's because it's coming from Greek.
I see.
So numisma means the coin, and one is a logic of studying coins. So I became a numismatist. I'm still a numismatist, but of course, as I have got this wide range of interest, I started working on art history and archaeology, especially the Indian Ocean maritime trade connected with Buddhism. And since I was, as you correctly said, I was working on Central Asia, mainly Pakistan, Northern India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. So I also looked at the Buddhist and Hindu sculptures, and they were the first in India, especially the Hindu sculpture, Hindu iconography of Shiva and Vishnu. They were created in Gandhara, that is today's Pakistan and part of Afghanistan.
Extraordinary. And Central Asia at the time was very much the center of human civilization, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Because the Central Asia is divided by the Hindu Kush mountain range. So there was one civilization on the northern side of it. On the southern side of it, it is India. It's a part of Afghanistan and Pakistan. When Chandragupta Maurya created the Mauryan Empire, the frontier, the border was the Hindu Kush mountain range. And also all before Alexander, Persians were there. Then Alexander came in, then the Parthians, Scythians, Kushans, and then the Timurids and Mughals. So it was it was like a bridge connecting north of Hindu Kush, which is part of Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, with India. So it's very interesting. It's something like a melting pot where all the civilizations met, and its richness is enormous in all the outcome, the masterpieces, the sculptures, coins, whatever, any artwork that we are talking about.
Extraordinary. And where does Sri Lanka fit into this ancient civilization? Because we know, we hear a lot about Sri Lankan history and Sri Lankan civilization, but we don't know a lot. When I say we, normal, ordinary Sri Lankans, we don't know a lot about our relations with the outside world, and especially these Central Asian regions that you were speaking of.
I mean, to make a long story short, Sri Lanka was the center of the world. This is, I'm not saying this, but the Egyptian monk Cosmas says this in the 6th century. The reason is, during this period, the only ocean known to the Greeks and the Romans and other civilizations was the Indian Ocean. They never ventured to Atlantic Ocean, they never went to Pacific. Not that there were no inhabitants there, but there were no relationships. So it was much easier for the Greeks to come through the Red Sea and venture into the Arabian Sea and come to Sri Lanka. So the other thing is that any ship coming from the west, going towards east, they had to stop over here.
Right.
And also at the very beginning they were doing coastal navigation. So just, very close to they
didn't venture out into the deeper oceans.
Open sea. So they come to Sri Lanka for water, food and other things. And then of course, as Cosmas says, this was a market where the things were exchanged. For example, sandalwood and also silk coming from China and other places, and they were exported to the Roman world, and also precious stones, pepper, spices and many things. So as a result of this, like in Central Asia, what you find in Sri Lanka is different kinds of people came here. Of course from South India first, North India, Persians, Bactrians, that means Gandharan, and then Greeks, Romans, until about the 5th, 6th century. And then the trade orientation changed towards the east. Then of course all the other countries like Burma, Thailand, especially Java, and also later by the 7th century Tang dynasty in China. So if we look at our Sri Lankan history, for example, there are about 30 Greek and Roman writers talking about Sri Lanka known as Taprobani. There are
That's amazing.
And 45 Chinese authors talking about Sri Lanka.
And have these texts in China and in Greece been documented?
Yeah, they are documented and now translated.
So this is the sort of thing which should be taught in our history curriculum in Sri Lanka.
The Greek and Latin texts were translated by many people, but recently my former teacher at Kalaniya of Western Classical Culture, DPM Virakodi, translated Greek and Latin text into English. And then one of my friends who is in France translated all the Chinese text into French. Now we are thinking about translating them into English as well. So these things are there apart from other sources, epigraphy and all that. So these are very, of course, then you have the Arabic sources as well, which are translated. So Sri Lanka was known to many civilizations. That's the richness of this country.
So getting back to the study of coins, numismatics. I shall attempt manfully to pronounce this. It's not a word which we pronounce very often in Sri Lanka. Now, you studied the Greek and Roman coins, which were in wide circulation across what we now call India and of course the Central Asian countries. But what about Sri Lanka? Have we found many coins in Sri Lanka and what origin are they?
Same thing. Depending on the connections we had with different countries, if you study the coins, you can see who came here. The earliest coins are what we call the Katshapana. In Sinhalese, we call them Hasebukasi, and in English, punchmark coins. It is a term given by the British. So these coins were in circulation in northern India, especially under the Mauryan Empire, what we call the imperial series. They are found in this country in hundreds, if not in thousands. And what happens is when the original punchmark coins were not issued after the 2nd century BC, then we started making our own copies. Instead of punching, they started casting. And then you get the South Indian coinage.
Now, these coins are made of which metal?
3 metals. One is of gold, silver and bronze. The punchmark originally, it's only silver, right? In general, all the coins circulated in this country, there were 3 metals. Punchmark coins were made of silver, And then what happened here was they had a copper core and covered it with the silver covering. And they were, I mean, of course, in ancient time they were fakes, but they were in circulation. And then South Indian coins came in, Pandya coins, Chera coins, most of the dynasties. And then by that time, the Greek coins came to the Indian Ocean, and also followed by the early imperial coinage and Julio-Claudian period, Claudius, Nero, and others. So those are gold coins and silver coins. And from Constantine I, what we call the late Republican coinage, until about Arcadius and Honorius. So these were mainly the coins which were in circulation in Sri Lanka were bronze, but they issued also gold and silver. So when Byzantine Empire completely collapsed, these coins were still in circulation, and they were so popular, Sri Lankans made copies of them. That means they just imitated the emperor's portrait, which looks like a Picasso painting, and then the reverse, instead of having the Latin legend, they had symbols, asterisks and crosses and things like that. But according to archaeological evidence, especially from Anuradhapura, they were in circulation for 200 years after the collapse of the Roman Empire. And according to my estimation, so far we have found about 3 lakhs of Roman coins.
300,000 Roman coins. So they're mainly in Anuradhapura in the excavations?
Everywhere
Around Sri Lanka.
I mean, especially in the dry zone, Anuradhapura and also Tissamaharama, all those places. And the one hoard was found in Beragama, that southern part of close to Ambalantota, about 12 kilometers north of Ambalantota. It was in a pot, contained 80,000 coins.
80,000 coins. My
both
goodness.
Original and the imitations, local imitations. And then we have other coinages coming into, I mean, like Sasanian coins. And then, I mean, with the occupation of the Cholas of the country, they introduced their coinage, Rajaraja Chola and especially Rajaraja Chola. And then when Sri Lanka was reunited by Vijayabhahu, they started minting coins with their names written in Nagari, in some form of Sanskrit. So those were there. And in the 7th century before that, our trade relationships started with China. And you get thousands of Chinese coins in circulation in this country.
So when you say trade relationships with China, whose ships were they? Were they China? We heard of Chinese fleets which have visited Sri Lanka, but what about the reverse? I mean, whose ships were they mainly?
According to the archaeologists, Chinese were very active in the Land Silk Road, which starts somewhere around the 1st century, right? So it is very long distance one. But Chinese never ventured into the Indian Ocean. So they really started only in the 7th century. So from the 7th century onwards, the Chinese came in. That's why we get in Polonnaruwa especially Chinese ceramics, Chinese coins, right? But our relationship with the Tang dynasty in China started somewhere around the 2nd century. According to the Chinese texts, many delegations were sent from Sri Lanka to the capital of the Tang dynasty in China with the bhikshunis, the nuns, Buddhist nuns. So they were not speaking Chinese. They went there, they learned Chinese. When the second delegation went there, the Sri Lankan bhikshunis who were there before them, they were speaking in Chinese. So there were several delegations went there. There is no proof that they traveled in Chinese ships. They used either Sri Lankan ships or the South Indian ships. So the navigation was going that direction. The other things that we hear about the Chinese connections here, they are much later.
I see.
Right.
Extraordinary indeed. We need to take a short commercial break. We are in conversation with Professor Osmund Bopearachchi. Don't go away, we'll be right back.
People's Platform.
Companies play better politics than the politicians of today.
We are not supposed to play with the people's expectation. Then it will be a huge disaster.
When you're bankrupt and when you're going to bankruptcy, two different.
The grandfather is saying it is going to take this long. What does he know?
It's about the lack of sense of humor in Sri Lankans.
Issues that matter the most. Unfiltered discussions. Real answers. Face to face. Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on TV1.
ඒගොල්ලන්ට මේ අපිට කියන්න බෑනේ මේ අනේ හාල් ටික හොයලා දෙන්න කියලා.
අහන ප්‍රශ්නේ තමයි උත්තර දෙන්න ඔබතුමාත් අහපු ප්‍රශ්නෙට. ඌ බලාපොරොත්තු කන්දක් බීලානේ ඇවිල්ලා තියෙන්නේ.
සදාකාලිකව ඒගොල්ලන්ට කොරායි කිඹුල්ලු බල ඉන්න පුළුවන්.
ජනතාව බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන අත් වශයෙන්ම ශනික යම්කි සහනයක්.
දැනට තියෙන රජයයි ඒ තිබිච්ච රජයන අතර අහසට පොළොව වගේ වෙනසක් තියෙනවා.
මොකද අපි දැක්ක මීට පෙරත් ඔය ජවනිකාව අපි දැක්ක ඔය නාට්‍ය අපි දැක්කා.
කලබල වෙන්න එපා රොෂාන්. අපි ඔය වගේ ප්‍රශ්න කරන්න ආචාර්ය උපාධි සහතික නැතුණා කියලා කියන්න පුළුවන්ද?
අත එක පැහැදිලි කිරීමක් කරන්න පස්සේ ඔබට තීරණය කරන්න පුළුවන්.
අපි හැමෝම එකතු වෙලා මේ රට හදමු.
දවස සතිය දිනවල සවස 6:30ට.
Our development era kickstarts from 2002-2005.
If you're off duty, right, you're entitled to do what you want. And Niresh, whether it's pluck coconuts or whether it's scraping the coconuts, they have the freedom to do that.
By having taxes on imports for the food on the poorest of the poor is a big problem.
I think economic inclusion of the rural people is very important to keep the economy going.
Government and state are two things. So time to time we need restructuring. We can't go on. That is the main reason why NPP won.
Face the Nation every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. on TV1.
ජාතික මෙහෙවරින් අපි කතා බහ කරන්නේ පුරුෂ පාර්ශවයට කාන්තා පාර්ශවයට වෙනසක් නැතුව ආයුර්වේදයට අනුව ලස්සන වෙන්නේ කොහොමද කියලා.
හොඳම මොයිස්චරයිස් එක තමයි කොමඩු.
යම්කිසි වයස් මට්ටම් වලට පැමිණෙනකොට ඇති වෙන බෝන් නොවන රෝග තත්ත්වයන් තුලදී කොයි ආකාරයෙන්ද ඇස ආරක්ෂා කරගන්නේ?
බහුලවම අන්ධභාවයට පත්වන රෝගී තත්ත්ව ගත්තොත් ඇත්තටම ලෝකේ ලංකාවේ දෙකම නම්බර 1 ඇත්තටම තියෙන සුද ඇහි සුද.
නිරාමිෂ සිතුවිලි වලින් තමයි පිබිදෙන්නේ. ඒ වුණාට ප්‍රශ්නේ ටික වෙලාවක් යනකොට වෙනස් පැත්තකට යන්න පුළුවන්.
මූලික අරමුණ සියදිවි හානි වැළැක්වීම වුණාට ඕනම කෙනෙකුට ඕනම ප්‍රශ්නයක් ඕනම ගැටලුවක් ගැන කතා කරන්න අපිත් එක්ක යොමු වෙන්න පුළුවන්.
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 11ට. මේ වසන්තේ මේ ආරාධනය විසේකාර දඟකාර හැඩකාර කුමාරයන්ට සහ කෝල කොමල මනලෝල කුමාරියන්ටයි. මේ වසන්තේ සිරස වසන්ත කුමරා සහ කුමරිය ලෙස කිරුළු පලදින්න දැන්ම සැරසෙන්න. වයස අවුරුදු 18ත් 25ත් අතර කුමාරයන් සහ කුමාරියන් මෑතකදී ගත් ඡායාරූපයක් සමග පෙබරවාරි 20 වෙනිදාට පෙර අයදුම් කරන්න. ලිපිනය නිෂ්පාදක සිරස වසන්ත කුමරා සහ කුමරිය ස්ටයින් ස්ටුඩියෝ බොරුපන පාර රත්මලාන. පිවිසෙන්න අවුරුදු.sirasatv.lk. People's Platform.
Welcome back to the People's Platform. We are in conversation with the noted archaeologist Professor Osmund Bopearachchi. Professor, now let's talk about excavations in Sri Lanka itself. About 40 or 50 years ago, we had a lot of excavating, and even before that, during the British period and so on. The names of many prominent archaeologists are well known, household names, in fact, Professor Paranavitana, Professor Roland Silva, and so on. But we don't hear of a lot of excavating going on now, of the importance of archaeology as such today.
During the British period, started by H.C.P. Bell, followed by Hockart and others, they were excavating extensively in all the sites of Sri Lanka, especially on Radhapura, Polonnaruwa and Sigiriya. Bell worked there. And Professor Sernath Parnavithana, who was trained as an archaeologist, working under the British Empire still before the independence, he also started working in Anuradhapura and Sigiriya. And this tradition continued after the independence, like Godukumbure, Raja de Silva and others. Then all of a sudden there was a boom in archaeological excavations in early 1980s, thanks to Dr. Roland Silva, who is an architect and an archaeologist, who opened what we call the cultural triangle with the support, financial support of UNESCO. So he opened, he got the triangle, which is, Kandy, Polonnaruwa and Anuradhapura, including Sigiriya. So it's at Sigiriya, Professor Senaka Bandanayake was excavating, and Polonnaruwa Leelananda Premathilaka. And then in Anuradhapura, in two main sites, Hemaratnayake in Jetwanarama, and also Chandra Wickramagamage, followed by T.G. Kulatunga. So they had financial support, and it was really, it's not very scientific. They opened large zones, and which allowed us to now understand how big these monastic sites were. And then, of course, they found the CCF, Central Cultural Fund, which is now run by the ticket that the tourists pay to enter the sites. And there were some excavations going on because of the financial crisis we had in this country. Most of these massive excavations came to an end. So here and there are some excavations, but for particular reason. Not large things, but we call the test pits. I can remember I did some excavations in 2012 in the East Coast in Kuchaveli and also at Ridhiyagam and other places. They were very targeted excavations looking for chronology and the artifacts and other things.
Not the mass scale excavations like Anuradhapura.
Yeah. Now, apart from few delegations working, there was a time, 1980s, 90s, there were 15 foreign archaeological missions working in this country. British, French, Japanese, Polish, Russian, and also from Czech Republic that time. And they were working here. They all came to an end. So this is a difficult period for Department of Archaeology. I hope they will start again doing excavations, but the things we have uncovered, enormous. Just to give you an example, despite all the efforts of Roland Silva, only 10% of the Abhayagiriya monastic site is excavated. 90% is remaining. It is not absolutely necessary to excavate everything, but they have done essential to get an idea how big it was. Abhayagiriya in the 5th century, according to Farsian, there were 5,000 monks living there. So it's a huge monastic sites with kitchen, Jantagra, that means hot and cold water baths, swimming pools and everything.
Extraordinary.
Yes.
Sri Lanka has such a rich history. But it takes a significant amount of funding in order to excavate, because it's a painstaking process, isn't it?
That's right. If you do a scientific excavation, you can't have a huge surface excavated. So normally we go, by 5 inches by 5 inches, very slowly. Keeping a full record of everything what we find. We can have an urgent one, that's, if there is a road construction or something, just to see what is beneath it. But normally now the archaeological excavations are more scientific. So we need to collect carbon samples and other, for the paleobotany and carbon samples for dating. So they are very slow, but they are more accurate. There are very good archaeologists in this country.
Now, what advice would you give to young Sri Lankans who are studying archaeology? Because some of our local universities do offer that as a degree.
Yeah.
What is their career path? Should they stay in Sri Lanka, or is archaeology this sort of global discipline, which basically the sky is the limit? You can go to so many countries and do so much interesting work.
Yeah, I always encourage our students to go abroad. I mean, if you can't go very far, at least India now, they are offering a lot of programs. I mean, MPhil, MA, MPhil, PhD programs, and also you can go there and work and get experience. I mean, either they come back or they work there. It's not. I mean, it's not really important at this point. But there are opportunities to go out. The problem is in Sri Lanka there are so many universities giving training in archaeology. So the job market is very less. There are no posts. Unless there is a boom, economic boom in the country, where all these graduate students, they are very good, can be trained. And also they should give a multidisciplinary education. Not only concentrated on Sri Lanka, but to see what happened in the outside world. Our relationships with India, and also especially with Southeast Asia. Very few archaeologists or art historians working on Southeast Asian context, especially from the 7th century onwards. We had very close relationship with Java, Thailand, Burma, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam.
No, this is not something we learn in school. We are very centered within Sri Lanka. We learn of our ancient kings and Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa and so on, but we don't learn of this aspect of international trade.
One of the reasons, if I may say so, a lack of trained professors in the country. I mean, they can teach our history based on the chronicles, but the history is not just isolated. Being an island, we always have some sort of insular concept of history. We started our discussion saying that this is the center of the world. If it is the center, we need to understand what happened in India, what happened in Gandhara, what happened in Rome, and also in Southeast Asia and China. So we really need professors and teachers who are capable of doing multidisciplinary education, teaching. This is lacking. And especially I was doing this project on Aurikuteshwara during the 7th century, how trade went from here to the Southeast Asia with Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy and also iconographies. So you need to work with them. We need to send our students abroad and learn these diverse aspects of art and archaeology.
Extraordinary indeed. Now, you were originally based in France.
Yes.
But the French seem to, or the Europeans per se, seem to have a lot of interest in these excavations in Asia. And perhaps in other areas of the world. Why is that? What motivates them?
Because no country can be isolated from, from their geographical zone and beyond. So French were, I was leading the French archaeological delegation in Sri Lanka for about 20 years. Did a lot of excavations. Money came from France, but it was a joint collaboration with the Department of Archaeology. I started working with Roland Silva and all the other Shiranda Renegala, W. Vijaypal and others. And like same way, before me, there were French archaeological delegations working here. So, and also I work very closely in Thailand, Burma and other places. And also the French archaeologists, they have what we call the French school, which they call the École Française. They have the French government has a base in Pondicherry. There is one base in Thailand in Bangkok. There is one base in Cambodia. There is one base in Java, China and Japan. Also other countries like Egypt and Rome and other places. So these schools, they call it school, but they are institutes. So they train French and other students in global archaeology.
So archaeology, the reputation is that it's mainly about digging and that kind of science, but in fact it's all about human history, isn't it?
Yes.
Where you're talking about paintings, religions, trade, so many things.
So many, yeah, absolutely right. So we are looking for how human activities were transformed into objects, what we call the material culture. It can be jewels, beads, coins, artifacts, ceramics, paintings, stone sculptures. So these activities were manifested in different forms. So we are digging into the past. So if you find, for example, beads, for making the jewelry or the necklace. So we are now capable of saying, analyzing them and to say the origin of the bead, where it was made, where the silica came from, where the furnaces were, whether they were in circulation in Afghanistan, whether they were circulation in Korea. We have a fabulous database. Same thing for the coins. Of course, we don't need to do much analysis, because looking at the coins, if they are in good condition, we can say where they came from. And ceramics. In Sri Lanka, you get North Indian ceramics, you get South Indian black and red ware, and you get Persian ceramics, and also Chinese. Enormous amount of Chinese ceramics. So especially in Buddhist monasteries, so the Buddhist monks were using Chinese ceramics in their monastic life. And also other ways, even the bones of the animals that people ate, things like that. So it has, and also the study of pollens, what sort of trees we had in the country. So it's very interesting. To be an archaeologist, you have to be a scientist of all the disciplines, including physics.
Right. So history is always changing, isn't it, according to what archaeologists find out?
Yeah.
Because the history that we learned perhaps 30 years ago may not be quite accurate now after the findings of the last several decades.
For example, to give you an idea, what I'm basically working in Central Asia, when I first wrote my thesis based on the successors of Alexander, their names are written on the coins. I have seen all the collections in major collections in the world. My first book came out in 1991. 2 years after, 4 tons of coins were found in Afghanistan, with new kings, with new challenges. So it changes. It changed completely the history of that world. It's the same thing here, that we find epigraphical evidence, especially inscriptions, giving a lot of new evidence for that. And also archaeology, there was something that we neglected to a certain extent in Sri Lanka, is the diffusion of Mahayana Buddhism in the country, and also expansion of Mahayana Buddhism towards the east, especially towards Thailand and other countries. Sri Lanka was a generating point for all the diffusions of philosophies, languages, and aesthetics, iconographies. So
that's very interesting, because what we generally learn is all these these nations, they came to Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
We the latest were, of course, the British, and before that the Dutch and the Portuguese, and of course before that the South Indian dynasties. But it wasn't simply, now those are invasions, but this is all about trade and civilizations intermingling.
Yeah, absolutely. You are right. Take a pause. Okay, we can start. Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's a very, very interesting point that you made. There were invasions, there were occupations. When we talk about the Chola occupation, it was an occupation. But in the meantime, there were other people who came in. For example, Romans never colonized Sri Lanka. Persians never colonized Sri Lanka. In the 7th century, when Vajrabodhi came from South India to Sri Lanka, there were 35 ships, Persian ships, anchored close to Beruwala. So Vajrabodhi got into one of these ships and went to China, to the Tang capital. Right? So they were Pacific traders. First you get the North Indians, South Indians, and also people from Rome, and then later the Chinese. They never occupied Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka was a good grounds, because thanks to the politics of the kings and all that. So they were doing their trade. And for example, the Palladius or Phaeacian says when the traders came, they anchored their ships in the ocean. They used to go inland, taking the navigable rivers, and the prices of the goods were, goods were laid out on the banks of the rivers with the price they want. So the traders will come and take them and go, pay the money and go. So it was an open market. There were emporia everywhere. That means place of trade exchanges. So it's a wonderful atmosphere for them. So with this, what happened in the past was new ideas came in, even regarding religions. Right? Jainism was in this country, Buddhism, Hinduism, and different parts of Buddhism like Vaitulavadya, Vajrayana, esoteric Buddhism, and all that. And from Sri Lanka, they went towards the Southeast Asia. As I said earlier, the Bhikshunis going to the Tang dynasty, and also later our artwork, especially we talk very less, but it's very important, which I am working on now, the inspiration of Pali in Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Burma, and others. This inspiration can be seen in their texts, in their practices, and also in the paintings, in the iconography. Southeast Asia is more inspired by Pali than Northern Sanskrit. It's a big statement.
Extraordinary indeed.
Yeah.
Now, you've written several books on a variety of subjects. Would you like to tell us about some of them?
Yeah, I have written about 6.
And I'm afraid this will be our final question, simply because we are running out of time.
Okay.
Although this is a fascinating topic.
Yeah, I have written about 16 books and more than 150 scientific articles, and plus, editions of different collected works and all that. So first I started with, my first publications were on coins, and gradually I shifted towards iconography, especially Buddhist and Hindu iconography. Then it's almost like the trade. Then I come back to Sri Lanka, having that formation. Then I started digging here. Doing excavations, working on the trade. Now I am working, and then I finished just this year a huge project that was going on for 10 years, the Mahayana establishment in this country. We found 125 new sites here, from 7th century to the 10th century. The next project that I am working on is the Kandyan period paintings depicting the life story of the Buddha and the previous lives, Jataka, which were only inspired by Pali text. There's no inspiration of Sanskrit in this country. And this story of the Buddha is different from the life story of the Buddha narrated in Sanskrit text. So this is what I am working on. So that will be my next publication.
Extraordinary indeed. And you must send me some of your books
I'll do.
to read, because this is indeed fascinating.
Yeah.
The history of Sri Lanka as we usually don't know it.
Yeah.
But you in France and now in Berkeley, you know so much more about it.
Yeah.
Wonderful indeed. And I'm afraid we are out of time. My thanks to my special guest, Professor Osmund Bopearachchi, for being with us this evening.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor. And thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away, because the news is coming up next. Have a good evening.